amazing. That's amazing. That is absolutely phenomenal. I have to tell my kids that I'm a rock star now.
Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Yesterday, you'll remember, White House Chief of Staff John Kelly delivered 18 minutes of mesmerizing remarks from the briefing room. He begged politicians and the press not to politicize the mourning of Gold Star families. General Kelly singled out Florida Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who you just saw, for special criticism. He called Wilson, quote, an empty barrel, forever talking about herself and ever willing to exploit the dead to burnish her own reputation.
And a congresswoman stood up, and in the long tradition of empty barrels making the most noise, stood up there and all of that, and talked about how she was instrumental in getting the funding for that building. And we were stunned. Stunned that she'd done it. Even for someone that is that empty a barrel, we were stunned.
So how did the Congresswoman respond? Well, chastened by this criticism from a man who has given his life and lost a son in the service of this country, Congresswoman Wilson apologized for her demagoguery, pledging that from now on she'll stick to fighting the president over disagreements about policy. No, wait, just kidding. In fact, Congresswoman Wilson seemed delighted by the attack on her, mostly because it made her more famous, which, by the way, just goes to prove that General Kelly was right in the first place. The Congresswoman is now bragging with characteristic immodesty. She's become a rock star.
You mean to tell me that I have become so important that the White House is following me and my words? This is amazing. That's amazing. That is absolutely phenomenal. I have to tell my kids I'm a rock star now.
24 hours later, there's still no evidence that Congresswoman Wilson listened to or thought about anything General Kelly actually said, much less learned from it. Instead, and you'll be shocked by the creativity here, she now dismisses General Kelly as a racist. Keep in mind that General Kelly said not a single word about race because race was entirely irrelevant to what he was talking about. Doesn't matter. He's a bigot, says Congresswoman Wilson. How exactly does she know that? Well, because the phrase empty barrel, a term she concedes she's never heard before, is, according to Congresswoman Frederica Wilson of Florida, a racist slur.
Empty barrels make the most noise. And he was using that, he was likening that to you. Basically, that you're
I think that's a racist term, too. I'm thinking about that when we looked it up in the dictionary because I had never heard of an empty barrel. And I don't like to be dragged into something like that.
Looked it up in the dictionary. That definition isn't there, by the way. What you're looking at, though, is another disgraced politician alleging yet more fake bias crimes to hide her own failures. You'd think Democrats would be embarrassed by this routine by now. It's tired and absurd, not to mention divisive and dumb. Who's not sick of it at this point? But nope, Democrats still willing to defend it because, you know, whatever it takes. MSNBC Lawrence O'Donnell explained to his viewers that the phrase empty barrel, which, by the way, was coined by Plato and used by Shakespeare, is indeed racist because it was part of a broader effort to, quote, dehumanize Frederica Wilson.
John Kelly never sat beside a student like Frederica Wilson in his elementary school. The language about black people in John Kelly's white neighborhood was exactly the same language about black people that was used at that time in white communities in the segregated South. I know the neighborhood John Kelly comes from. I know the culture. It was a in which calling someone who looked like Frederica Wilson an empty barrel was the kindest thing that would have been said about her. You know what wasn't sacred when he was a kid growing up, where he was growing up? Black women. He took time, a lot of extra time, to call a black woman who he doesn't know and he doesn't like an empty barrel.
Unbelievable. MSNBC's Joy Reid, never one for subtlety, went even farther than that. She attacked General Kelly's entire childhood as racist. Quote, Kelly grew up in segregated Boston, she tweeted, in an Irish Catholic neighborhood where women were bullied, not honored, and blacks scorned and rejected. Because really, there's nothing like using growth ethnic stereotypes when you're fighting for racial justice, as she says she is. According to Joy Reid, the problem isn't just General Kelly, it's the Irish. They're the problem. This is grotesque, obviously. The morons making these arguments are sick. It's a symptom of disease to imagine racism behind every disagreement. It's also, by the way, the death of traditional political debate. You can argue with people who disagree with you, who are just wrong, but there's no reasoning with bigots. You can only crush them. Your opponents suddenly become your enemies. They must be destroyed. And that, by the way, is how many on the left now see General Kelly, not to mention you and me.